When my sister called me that Saturday at 6:50 p.m., telling me she was calling in that favor I owed her for getting me my job, I was sitting on my couch with nothing better to do. "I need you to babysit Timmy," she said. "Seriously?" I asked. And as if she had hidden cameras in my little apartment, she said, "I know you've got nothing better to do. Besides, it's about time he got some bonding time with his uncle. Can you seriously not get anybody else to babysit? I've got, reruns to watch and areas on my body to scratch." "No, I don't have anyone else. None of my babysitters are picking up, and you can scratch those also important itches on the drive here." "What about one of your girlfriends? What are they doing? They always seem to have all the free time in the world, since they're always around you like you have the answers to the universe." "I'm going on a girls' night, so no, they can't babysit. Besides, you owe me. And like I said, I know you have nothing better to do. So just be here before 8. Before I could even come up with another excuse for not coming, I heard a click as my sister hung up the phone. With an over-exaggerated sigh and a groan that left me winded, I got up from the couch and got ready. As I rummaged around my room for a shirt that smelled decent, I thought about my nephew and the encounter to come. It wasn't like I didn't like him. The little dude was just super weird. Like staring to your soul weird. Like to the point of making you think he's wondering how much your soul would go for on Craigslist. It also didn't help that he barely talked, and when he did, he spoke in these hushed whispers that made you have to get really close to him. Resigning myself to my fate, I threw on a navy blue shirt with a mysterious stain in the lower left-hand corner, put on some sweatpants and some flip-flops. Hopping into my car, I was off to watch the little creepazoid. Pulling into the driveway of my sister's house, I knew the night was going to be great when I saw the little weirdo watching me through the window. It made me shudder as his outline followed me as I walked to the front door. Raising my hand to knock, I hit open air as the door swung open and I was greeted by the little dude. Greeted is an exaggeration though. Only if you count staring up at someone like they're an alien coming to probe you and your family a greeting. I stared down at the little guy, wondering how in the hell I was even related to him. He looked nothing like my sister. His pale skin was complete opposite to my sister's olive-colored skin. Where my sister had a round face, his was slim and defined. My sister's button nose made his needle-sharp one look like it could cut diamonds, and my sister with her curly brown hair could only be further from his blazing red hair if she was bald. I had asked my sister many times if she had adopted the little guy and forgot about it, but I knew that was unlikely. She had gotten pregnant 5 years before at a music festival, and was so high the whole time that she didn't even know who the kid's father was. I would say that it was a surprise, but my sister was always kind of, let's say, free-spirited. Our parents, on the other hand, took the news like they were told their pastor had gone on a killing spree. They barely talked to my sister anymore, saying that she had been corrupted by the world. I didn't have the heart to tell them that their little angel had been corrupted way before this. As I stood there, the little Ed Sheeran cosplayer just stood there staring at me, as usual. I made my way past him, walking inside the house. "Where's your mom?" I asked. I almost slapped myself as I realized I wouldn't get an answer. The little Ted Bundy just stood there staring, examining my body as if to figure out how much my organs would go for on the black market. I called for my sister and heard her shout from her room, "Just a minute!" A lot longer than a minute later, my sister came out of her room, her ridiculously tall heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She wore this glittery dress that I was pretty sure would blind people if she wore it in direct sunlight, and she had her hair done up in a way that made it both look uncomfortable to have on your head and to look at. And the amount of makeup she had smeared across her face made her look like a Van Gogh painting. "What the hell's up with that getup? I thought you were going on a girls' night, not the clown college," I said with a wry smile. "Oh, shut up. At least I'm going out. Unlike some people who would much rather stay at home all day and scratch their balls," she said as she stared into the mirror on the wall, adjusting that bird's nest atop her head. "Anyway," she continued, "I'm gonna be leaving early since you decided to come early." I cursed the fact that our parents taught us to be punctual as my sister continued. "Timmy should be asleep at 9. It's..." She trailed off as she checked her phone. 7:35, so you've got some time to bond before he goes to bed. He shouldn't be much of a hassle. He's already had his bath, and as you can see, he's already dressed for bed. I looked over to Timmy, who wore a grey onesie covered in sharks and alligators. I looked closely at it from my seat on the couch, and I was pretty sure some of them had red marker stains on their teeth, so it looked like they had just gotten done with a kill. What in the actual hell was wrong with this kid? I asked myself. Also, he's already eaten, but in case he gets hungry again, there are some snacks in the fridge. I should be back around 10, maybe a little later. She saw my incredulous look and said, "Okay, I'll probably be back a lot later than 10. Help yourself to some food in the fridge." I didn't have a problem babysitting the little guy late into the night since he'd be asleep, but I really wanted to know what my sister was on if she really thought I'd come close to eating her food. The woman could barely boil water without almost burning her house down. "Oh yeah," she said, pulling me from my thoughts. "Make sure he has a stuffed animal. He can't sleep without it." Hearing this, Timmy perked up from his spot in front of the TV and ran to his room. A few seconds later, he came out dragging something I couldn't quite make out. He stopped in front of me and raised it to my face so I could see what it was. It was a giant stuffed albino spider. The thing was horrifying. It had 8 red beady eyes atop its wide head with a gaping maw held open in a perpetual hiss. Long legs hung at its sides, about as thick as my thumb, and a bulbous abdomen that had Mr. Spinley written on it in red marker. I took my eyes off the plushie from hell and looked at my sister with concern. Getting up from my chair, I walked over to her and asked in a hushed tone, "Where in the Sam hell did you get that thing?" With half of a smile, she looked at me and said, "Come on, don't tell me you're still scared of spiders. I thought you got over that." "Firstly," I said, "one does not simply get over crippling arachnophobia. Secondly, you still didn't answer me. That thing has no right to look how it does. Looks like you ripped it from the mind of some depraved writer. I found it at Goodwill, and there's no need for you to freak out. It's just a plushie." She said the last words one at a time like I was a simpleton. Saying it's just a plushie doesn't make me feel any better. The thing looks like it could come alive at any second and liquefy my insides, but that's besides the point. You just let him keep the rejected Muppet from Goodwill? He seemed really drawn to it. Besides, I washed it and everything. It's fine. She said the last part in a placating tone. With a sigh, I relinquished my unease and tried to collect my thoughts that had strayed into the realm of the unreal. Okay, I'm over it," I said. "That's good, 'cause I gotta go," my sister said as she made her way to the door. "Have fun." She waved over her shoulder and she was out the door. A few seconds later, I heard her car start and pull off. Looking at my phone, I saw that the time was 7:40, and figured I should at least try to get to know Timmy. I looked at my nephew and asked, "Okay, little guy, what do you want to do?" He stared up at me, holding Mr. Spinley by one of his grotesquely long legs and pointed at the TV. "Okay then." I took my seat back on the couch and Timmy sat in front of the TV, his head blocking a quarter of the screen. I rolled my eyes, but I got over it. I thought he was going to continue watching what was on the screen. It seemed to be some old war documentary, but he switched it to National Geographic, and they seemed to really be trying to earn the graphic part of their geographic name. On screen was a pride of lions, ripping into the guts of some poor zebra that just wasn't fast enough. Gore littered the screen, parts of the zebra pulled here and there by different lions, their muzzles painted red with its guts. The most disturbing part of the scene before me was how entranced Timmy seemed to be by it. He held Mr. Spinley tight in his arms, his nose practically scraping the screen at how close he was. I could see the screen fog as he took deep breaths in and out, as if to try and smell the brutality on screen. While he was distracted, I texted my sister, "Hey, do you let him watch Nat Geo often?" She replied after a few minutes, "Yeah, he seems to really enjoy it. Why do you ask?" "No reason, I was just wondering if it was appropriate for him to watch." I looked up from my phone screen and saw that the TV was now vacant. What the hell? I thought. Was this kid part cat? I didn't even hear him move. I almost jumped out of my skin when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head and he was standing right next to the couch, his dark brown eyes staring into mine. I saw his mouth move, and a few seconds later realized that he had said something. He was just talking so low that I could barely hear him. It also didn't help that I was on the other side of the couch. I got up and walked over to him, stooping down so that we were on the same level. I listened closely and heard him say in a whispered voice, "I found something." "Oh, really? What did you find, buddy?" I watched with bated breath as he raised one tiny hand with a closed fist, thinking he's about to show me some spider he'd caught or something. I was a little befuddled when he showed me a black powder with little flecks of silver and purple. I opened my mouth to ask him what it was when I saw him take a deep breath, and before I could do anything he blew it into my face. The last thing I remembered before lights out was my head bouncing off the hardwood floor. When I woke up, my head felt like it was filled with cotton candy. It felt like I was 20 pounds lighter, and the house seemed to glow with color. And I felt like I was on the verge of laughing, a bellowing guffaw brewing in my stomach. I pulled out my phone, hitting the power button to turn on the screen. I looked away as I was momentarily blinded as the display lit up. Rubbing the spots from my eyes, I looked at the phone, squinting my eyes like a bad welder. It was 8:36. I blinked in bewilderment. What the hell was that powder? I pushed myself up off the floor and started towards Timmy's room. I walked up to the door, taking the knob in my hand, and I turned it. I was greeted by my nephew sitting on the ceiling. "What the heck are you doing up there, young man?" I asked. He seemed surprised to see me. He looked down at me from his spot next to the light fixture on the ceiling, a little surprise and questioning painted across his narrow face, his beady brown eyes fixed on mine. He stood up. I then realized that Mr. Spinley was next to him, affixed to the ceiling, its legs dangling from its sides, seeming to be the only thing that realized that gravity was still a thing. Timmy then placed both his hands on the ceiling. Then he did what I assumed to be a handstand. He was now hanging from his palms. He closed his eyes for a second and a dim glow surrounded him. Then he fell to the ground, landing on his feet, seeming to put more weight behind my theory that he was indeed half cat. I moved to question him when he stretched his arms out. A few seconds later, Mr. Spinley fell from the ceiling into his awaiting hands. What was that, Timmy?" I asked. He ignored me and started encircling me, moving around in a slow clockwise circle, dragging Mr. Spinley behind him by one of his legs. I heard him mumble to himself, but I couldn't quite make out what he said. He stopped in front of me, about 2.5 feet away. Then he raised Mr. Spinley to his face and said to the plushie,
"I didn't expect him to wake up so soon, but he still shouldn't be a problem."
I looked on in amazement, gawking at how cute it was that he talked to his plushie, in his raspy little whisper voice. It was positively adorable. It was odd how a part of me felt that I should feel uneasy, but my brain was probably just being silly from the bump on the noggin I had taken from falling over. I was even more amazed when I heard a low hiss escape from Mr. Spinley's mouth. Timmy nodded at the hiss and said,
"Trust me, it'll be fine."
Timmy looked up at me and said,
"Okay, Uncle, it's 8:39 and I've got a lot to get done, and I need you to stay out of my way. Can you do that for me?"
It was weird that he had stopped whispering, but I didn't mind the change too much. "I can do that." I trailed off as I remembered my sister saying that Timmy should be asleep at 9. "I'm sorry, little dude. Your mom said that you have to be asleep at 9. I heard another hiss come from the spider plushie, which somehow managed to sound snide. Timmy with an indignant tone looked at Mr. Spinley and said,
"Oh, shut up! I've got this!"
"My mom doesn't mind when I stay up a little later than normal. Plus, you'll be my favorite uncle," Timmy said, sporting the most adorable puppy dog eyes I've ever seen. It was so entrancing that I forgot that I was his only uncle. "Okay," I said, "but don't make a mess." My heart could have melted when he hugged me around the waist and ran out into the living room shouting,
"Best uncle ever!"
I followed after him, walking into the living room to see what he was up to. I found him digging under the big beige couch. He seemed to be digging for gold how hard he was searching. With one final grunt, he seemed to find what he was looking for. He pulled a huge book from under the couch, covered in dust. He lifted the book that was about 2 feet across, 3 feet tall, and about 4 inches thick. He hoisted it onto the coffee table. Blowing the dust off like we were in some 80s treasure hunting flick, I could see the cover. It was a deep red, almost burgundy, like the color of dried blood. Yet it held some speckles of silver here and there running across the cover. The only identifying marks on the book were 4 jagged lines that started in the middle and traveled to the spine of the book where they abruptly ended. I watched as he opened the old book, the creaking sound echoing in the room like old floorboards. The first page was almost completely blank. The only thing on it was, "To Timmy, with love, from." I couldn't read the rest. It looked like scribbles. I tried to read it, but I got a splitting headache, and the more I tried to make out what it was, the more my head hurt. Timmy stayed on that page for a while, staring into it like it held sentimental value. He eventually left the page, flipping through the book at an alarming speed. I thought his tiny hands were going to tear through the large paper, but I was surprised when he didn't. He finally seemed to land on a page that he liked, scanning over it and shaking his head in agreement to whatever it said. The words, if you can call the unintelligible scribbles that, were written in the same language as the one that caused my headache. I didn't even try to make out what it said this time, just watching and looking at some of the pictures that were across the page. They kind of looked like diagrams you would find in science textbooks, but I've never seen anything like those things before. Some had long, lanky limbs, and others had short, nubby ones that would be completely impractical if they actually existed, and so on. He seemed to be ready to do whatever trick he was about to do when he cracked his tiny knuckles, got up from the spot and moved to the TV that I didn't even realize was still on. He switched the channel to some late night cartoon that I was pretty sure kids his age weren't supposed to be watching. He sat back down at the coffee table, put his hands on the book, and started chanting. Unintelligible noises seemed to echo throughout the house. Photos on the wall began to rattle and furniture shook, and I could feel a rumble in my stomach as I sat with bated breath to see what was going to happen. When he stopped, he turned his attention to the TV. Following his gaze, I also started watching. The characters on screen sat at their couch, speaking of some inconsequential problem that they had that wouldn't matter in the next episode, when the father stopped talking, and a grimace painted itself across his face. I watched in curiosity, as he seemed to be about to deliver the punchline to a joke that was no doubt going to be some oddly specific pop culture factoid or at the expense of some celebrity. The other family characters seemed to notice his odd behavior and started calling his name. All of a sudden, his limbs started to stretch themselves. Grotesque popping sounds invaded my ears as the character's skin started to tear and stretch, and bones were pulled from their sockets. I stared at the sight before me, wondering what was the point of that, and was it supposed to be funny? After all, the show didn't shy away from rather gory punchlines for their jokes, but I couldn't see the humor in this one. As I sat there questioning what was going on, the other family characters from the show started screaming in reaction to what was no doubt horrifying to them. Then the screen cut away, and was replaced by a message that read, "We apologize for the interruption. Wolf Broadcasting Company is currently experiencing technical difficulties. We will be back with you in a moment." The message went away after a few minutes, and was replaced by another show about another animated family. I looked at my nephew, who sat with a contented smile painted across his face. "Did you do that?" I asked. He looked at me like I was soft in the head, as though the question wasn't even worth answering, and he didn't answer. And that's how the night went. He would go around the house, dragging the book behind him in one hand and Mr. Spindley in the other. He would do all kinds of tricks, like making furniture levitate, conjuring spheres of light and smoke, and at one point he made an orb of darkness, collecting all of the shadows from around the living room and coalescing them into an orb of pure darkness that sat floating in the middle of the room. It was mind-numbing to look at. It looked as though a piece of reality was missing, like someone had taken a cookie cutter and taken a chunk of reality. It was hard to focus looking at it, but as much as I wanted to look away, I couldn't. It called to me. I was drawn to it on the most basic of human instinct, to try and understand it. I was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. Without even realizing it, my hand had started to reach out to it, to try and plunge into the depths of the unknown darkness. I was called back to reality when I felt a small hand clamp around my wrist and pull me away from the orb. I looked down at my nephew, wondering why he had stopped me. I wanted so bad to touch the darkness. It actually hurt. Then he pointed to my still outstretched hand. I looked at my fingertips. They were coated in a thin layer of ice. I hadn't even noticed the hypothermia level of cold that came off in waves from the orb. I took a few steps away from the orb, a piece of me still longing to plunge into its frigid depths, not caring about the cold death that I would undoubtedly be greeted with. Timmy could probably still see the longing in my eyes because he made a few complex hand gestures and the orb shrank and faded into nothingness, the shadows returning to the living room. It felt as though a piece of me faded with the orb as it disappeared. "Okay, Uncle, it's 10:25. I looked at Timmy perplexed. Where did the time go? It felt as though I had just walked through the door 10 minutes ago to babysit my nephew. My nephew looked at me, realizing my questioning of the time. "Yeah," he began. "With the mix of that special powder and the orb of calling, your sense of time is probably as janky as a meth addict's teeth. Luckily for you, I'm actually pretty tired, so I'm up for one more spell. Come with me." He took me by the hand and led me to his room. I walked inside, still feeling the call of the orb. He positioned me in front of the full-body mirror that sat in the corner of his room. He gestured for one of my hands, and I offered him my left, the one that had been coated in ice. With lightning-fast speed, he pulled a needle out of what seemed to be thin air and plunged it into my finger. I didn't even yelp. I just watched as he pressed my index finger onto the surface of the mirror. I turned to ask if he needed anything else, but I saw that he already started chanting in that nonsense language, and I just let him focus, my mind going back to the orb. I was pulled out of my thoughts when I noticed my reflection. Once again, the shadows from the room started to coalesce over my reflection's shoulder. I felt myself become happy, and butterflies spawned in my stomach as I thought about being able to see the orb again. I looked over my shoulder so that I could see the orb, not through the mirror, but there was nothing there. I turned back to the mirror disappointed. I watched as once all the shadows had formed into a ball, the orb floated towards my reflection. It touched onto its left shoulder, and I felt warmth touch my left shoulder. But I knew nothing was there, and I also knew that that wasn't the orb of calling. The orb was cold. The orb would never produce warmth. My orb would never produce warmth. The jealousy I was slowly starting to feel towards my own reflection faded, knowing that it didn't get to experience the amazing cold embrace of the orb of calling. While I was thinking all of this, I didn't even realize that my reflection was slowly being covered by the darkness. I noticed once I felt the disgusting warmth start to spread across my body. It was horrible. It was like I stood in the sun while at the beach, the horrible warm sand going between my toes, while the heated wind buffeted my skin. I gagged as the warmth enveloped my body, as my reflection was covered in shadow. I watched as my reflection took a step forward and I made an involuntary one backward. A few more steps, and I watched as the mirror rippled, and my reflection, which was more like a shadow now, made its way out of the mirror. Each step it took making me step backward. I tried to look at my nephew to ask what was going on, but I felt like I was stuck in cement, my limbs refusing to move. I saw Timmy move into my line of sight and started to manipulate my shadow reflection. He raised its arm, and I followed suit. He seemed pleased with the result, and picked up the mock version of me like it was made of nothing. My stomach lurched as I was launched into the air by an invisible force. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on his bed, my arms and legs being positioned against my will like I was an action figure. My reflection sat in front of me, its posterior seated atop air like it was one of those street performers. I could feel my heart pick up its pace a little, as my nephew sat atop the shadow's lap, talking to Mr. Spinley, who sat on the ground. Its cotton-filled body had moving, but the hissing I had quickly realized was its voice filling the room.
What are you talking about?
Timmy said to Mr. Spinley.
Didn't you see what he's seen tonight? He won't crack. Most people crack from just seeing the TV trick, but this Nimrod didn't even bat an eye. He's made it this far.
Mr. Spinley let out a disgruntled hiss.
I mean, at the end of the night, it's up to you. I've had my practice, so it's your choice. You can starve if you want to, Timmy said.
I felt my heart drop to my toes and through the floorboards as the cobwebs in my head started to thin. I sat stuck, a shuddering breath escaping my lungs as panic started to pull at my mind. What did he mean, you can starve? My stomach lurched as Mr. Spinley jostled, his legs curling and stretching out. I let out a squeak as the fabric started to tear and pull apart, and like a butterfly coming out of its cocoon, Mr. Spinley stayed true to his name. Long stick-like spindly legs escaping from their fabric prison. As the plushie fell away, and what stood there before me, crouched like a spring ready to launch, was a 4-foot-wide albino arachnid. Its 8 blood-red eyes sat atop its bone-white head, the light glistening off of its eyes as it stared into mine. It crept towards me on long legs that ended on thick needle points that made muted clicking sounds as they pushed their way through the carpet and hit the floor underneath. Like a flamethrower going through a wall of tissue paper, the cobwebs in my head burned away, and I felt something break and my head clear. All the questions I wanted to ask that were in the back of my mind from the time I was knocked out came rushing to the front of my head, and along with it came the fear and terror that I was ignoring. At that exact moment, 2 noises filled the room. One was a long-awaited scream that was sitting in my lungs, waiting to be released, and the sound of broken glass, as the reflection of me Timmy the demon spawn sat on, shattered into a million pieces and he fell to the floor. I felt the warmth leave my body as Timmy hit the floor with a thud. The albino hell creature turned around with blinding speed to check on his master, and I took the opportunity to get the hell out of Dodge. I sprung from the bed and ran out the door. As I ran in the hall, I heard Timmy yell, "He's getting away!" Hearing this, I pumped my legs faster. I heard the clicking of the spider's legs as it came creeping out of Timmy's room. I stumbled into the living room, tripping over pillows and pieces of sofa as I realized what a mess the living room was in. The coffee table was smashed in two, one of the sofas was flipped and smoldering, while the other was covered in some fluid that I wasn't quite sure what it was. I steadied myself, looking over my shoulder as I saw the abomination crawling on the wall, while the spider was making his way across the ceiling. I reached for the door when a thick web stuck itself to the knob. My heart spiked so violently it felt like it would explode. I turned to the duo, feeling the dread of knowing that the end is near creep into my chest. I moved the scurry to one corner of the room to get away from the two, when I noticed the window Timmy was standing in when I first arrived. I didn't even have to think twice. I smashed through the window, shards of glass cutting my face and arms. Landing in a roll, I got to my feet as fast as I could, getting my keys out of my pocket, and made my way to my car. When I got my car started, I watched as my nephew stood in the window, one hand slowly stroking his pet, and the other hand waving me goodbye. As I was driving home, breaking the speed limit by a good amount, my mind went to my sister. I took out my phone to call her. She picked up on the third ring. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice frantic.
"Mommy's just fine."
My blood went cold when I heard Timmy's whisper voice come through the phone.
"Don't even bother coming back here. She's been under my control for a while now. It's probably best you focus on yourself after all. You've got bigger problems than me."
I could hear the smile in his voice as he taunted me. It both angered and terrified me. My words caught as I thought of my sister. I'll call the cops."
Ugh. I know you're stupid, but don't be stupid. I'm not gonna hurt your sister. Her food tastes good. Besides, she's still my mother. And tell as many people about me as you want. I'll give you less than a week before you end up in a nut house with a guy that finds it funny to smear you-know-what across the walls and call it art. And like I said, you've got bigger fish to fry.
The line went dead and I threw my phone into the passenger seat. I turned on the air conditioning and went home. I had always thought that the little kid was the spawn of Satan. But more than anything tonight, what made me really realize that it was true was that he actually enjoyed my sister's cooking. I chuckled to myself, laughing at the thought. That's when the tears came, like a floodgate. The realization that my sister was under that little psycho's control. I walked through my door and made my way to my room, still blubbering. I cranked my AC to as cold as it could go, stripped down to my boxers and cut off the light, letting the darkness and the chill of the AC consume me and my thoughts.